What if I told you that Donald Trump just made a strategic blunder so massive it could hand China the keys to global power? And it all started with a handshake in New Delhi that sent shockwaves through Washington. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to reveal how this single diplomatic meeting could reshape the entire global economy and why every American should be paying attention to what's happening right now. The unthinkable just happened. India, America's prized ally against China for over 2 decades, just extended its hand to Beijing in the most dramatic geopolitical plot twist of 2025. We're talking about a complete reversal of policies that 5 different administrations spent decades building. This isn't just another diplomatic meeting. This is the moment that historians might mark as the beginning of the end of American global supremacy. And the most shocking part? It's happening because of decisions made right here in Washington. For 20 years, Washington poured billions into making India the ultimate China containment tool. Military partnerships, technology transfers, trade deals worth hundreds of billions, all betting on one core assumption. India would always choose America over China when forced to pick sides. But that assumption just exploded in spectacular fashion. But Trump just shattered that 20-year strategy in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. And the consequences are already rippling across the globe. The shocking reversal that changed everything. Picture this scene. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stepping off his government plane in New Delhi for the first time in over 3 years. On the 18th and 19th August 2025, not as an enemy coming to negotiate from weakness, not as a rival forced to the table, but as a potential partner welcomed with full diplomatic honors by the Indian government. The symbolism alone is earth-shattering. For the past 4 years, India and China have been locked in the most dangerous military standoff since the 1960s. Deadly border clashes in 2020 left soldiers dead on both sides. India banned hundreds of Chinese apps, including TikTok. Chinese investment was blocked. Trade was restricted. Military buildups accelerated along their shared Himalayan border. The relationship was so toxic that many experts believed it would take decades to repair. Some thought it never would be repaired. And yet here we are, watching these 2 nuclear-armed giants take their first steps toward reconciliation. But here's what makes this moment truly historic: the specific commitments both sides are making. Direct flights between India and China are resuming after years of complete suspension. Think about that. You literally could not fly directly from Mumbai to Shanghai for years because of political tensions. Border trade routes that have been closed since deadly military clashes are now being discussed for reopening. We're talking about ancient trade paths through the Himalayas that connected these civilizations for thousands of years, suddenly becoming relevant again for modern commerce. China has promised to address India's biggest economic concerns: reliable access to fertilizer components that Indian agriculture desperately needs, and rare earth minerals that are essential for India's growing technology industry. These aren't small concessions. These are the building blocks of economic sovereignty. And perhaps most significantly, both governments are publicly signaling that they view their relationship as capable of moving beyond rivalry toward cooperation. Wang Yi's message couldn't be clearer. India and China can choose partnership over confrontation, prosperity over conflict. Trump's catastrophic miscalculation that backfired. For Washington, watching this diplomatic breakthrough unfold is nothing short of a nightmare scenario. The entire foundation of American strategy in Asia has always depended on keeping India and China at odds with each other. It's been the cornerstone of every major policy document, every military planning session, every trade negotiation for the past 20 years. But how did we get here? How did America lose its most important strategic partner in Asia? The answer lies in a series of diplomatic blunders that started with good intentions but ended in spectacular failure. Trump's approach seemed logical on paper. Apply maximum pressure on China through tariffs and trade restrictions, while simultaneously demanding that allies like India choose sides in this new Cold War. The theory was simple. Economic pressure would force China to capitulate, and allies would rally behind American leadership out of shared interests and values. But reality had very different plans. When Washington began demanding that India completely cut ties with Russia and stop buying Russian oil, the Indian government faced an impossible choice. Russian oil wasn't just cheap, it was keeping inflation under control for over 1 billion Indian citizens. We're talking about a nation where energy costs directly impact food prices, transportation costs, and the basic cost of living for families across the subcontinent. For India's leadership, this wasn't a geopolitical chess game. It was about economic survival. Completely cutting off Russian energy would have triggered massive inflation, potential social unrest, and economic hardship for hundreds of millions of people. No responsible government could accept that outcome just to satisfy Washington's geopolitical preferences. When India refused to completely abandon Russian oil, the response from Washington was swift and tone-deaf. Instead of understanding India's legitimate economic concerns, American officials responded with public criticism, threats of secondary sanctions, and lectures about democratic values. The message was clear: fall in line with American demands or face the consequences. For a proud nation like India, a civilization that has existed for thousands of years and gained independence through decades of struggle against colonial rule, being treated like a subordinate was absolutely unacceptable. Modi's government got the message loud and clear. America sees India as a chess piece to be moved around the board, not as a sovereign partner with legitimate interests of its own. China's masterstroke in diplomatic chess. While Trump was busy issuing ultimatums and making demands, Beijing was playing a completely different game, and playing it brilliantly. Chinese diplomats weren't showing up with threats or lectures about ideology. They were arriving with practical solutions to real problems that mattered to ordinary people. Wang Yi didn't come to New Delhi to discuss abstract geopolitical theories or demand ideological conformity. He came with concrete proposals that addressed India's most pressing economic needs. Resuming direct flights would boost tourism and business connections between the world's two most populous nations. Reopening border trade routes would create jobs and economic opportunities in remote regions that have been economically isolated for years. But the real genius of China's approach was what they didn't do. They didn't demand that India choose between Beijing and Washington. They didn't insist that India abandon its relationships with other powers. They didn't lecture India about its domestic policies or democratic institutions. Instead, China offered something that Washington seemed incapable of providing: partnership without strings attached. No ultimatums about Russian oil. No demands to restructure India's entire foreign policy. No threats of sanctions or economic retaliation. Just straightforward business relationships, practical cooperation, and mutual benefit. It was exactly what India wanted: respect for its sovereignty and recognition of its legitimate national interests. The contrast with American diplomacy couldn't have been starker. While Washington was demanding that India prove its loyalty by making economic sacrifices, Beijing was offering to help India achieve its economic goals. While American officials were issuing public criticisms and veiled threats, Chinese diplomats were quietly working behind the scenes to solve practical problems. The message from China was clear and compelling. We can work together as equals, focusing on areas where our interests align, without requiring either side to abandon their other relationships or compromise their core principles. The 1.6 trillion yuan reality bomb that changed everything. Here's the shocking truth most Americans don't realize. While we were obsessing over tariffs and trade wars, China quietly built the world's largest alternative economy. China now exports 1.6 trillion worth of goods to developing nations annually. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the entire GDP of Canada. It's more than China sells to the US and Europe combined. Let that sink in for a moment. Remember when everyone said China depends on Western consumers? That narrative just died completely. Beijing didn't just diversify, they built dependencies. From lithium mines in Chile to solar farms in Kenya, from 5G networks in Brazil to EV factories in Thailand. This isn't trade, it's economic colonization, but with better terms than anything the West ever offered. Here's a stat that should terrify Washington. Chinese overseas investment last year exceeded $200 billion. That's more than America invested abroad for the first time in modern history. Think about what that means. China is now the world's biggest external investor, creating jobs and infrastructure faster than we are. The electric vehicle revolution that's reshaping power. Want to see China's dominance in action? Look at the electric vehicle explosion that's happening right under our noses. Chinese companies now control 63% of global EV production. That's more electric vehicles than the United States, Europe, and Japan produce combined. But here's the kicker that changes everything. Chinese EV makers invested $47 billion overseas last year, more than they invested domestically for the first time ever. Picture yourself as a car buyer in Mexico City right now. You can buy a sleek Chinese EV for $15,000 that gets 300 miles of range, or you can buy an American equivalent for $35,000. Which would you choose? It's not even close. New Chinese EV factories are rising across 3 continents. BYD just opened massive production facilities in Brazil and Hungary. Geely is building plants in Malaysia and Belarus. CATL, the battery giant most Americans have never heard of, is constructing factories from Germany to Indonesia. This creates something more powerful than trade. It creates dependency. When Thailand hosts a Chinese EV factory employing 10,000 people, they're not just getting jobs. They're tying their economic future to Beijing's technology, Beijing's supply chains, and Beijing's success. And here's the part that should keep American strategists awake at night. EVs depend on lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth minerals. Guess who controls most of those resources? China has locked up supply agreements across Africa, South America, and Australia. They don't just make the cars, they control the entire supply chain from mine to showroom. The BRICS transformation that could end dollar dominance. Now here's where this gets really interesting for your wallet and your future. Imagine you're running a developing country right now. Maybe you're the finance minister of Nigeria or the trade minister of Indonesia. For decades, you've watched India and China bicker, while their rivalry kept BRICS from becoming anything more than an annual photo opportunity. But suddenly, the world's two most populous nations are exploring cooperation instead of confrontation. The implications are staggering. BRICS already represents 45% of the world's population and 35% of global GDP. That's bigger than the G7 combined. But it never reached its potential because of India-China friction. Remove that friction, and you're looking at the birth of a genuine alternative to Western economic systems. Current India-China trade sits at $135 billion annually, despite years of hostility and border tensions. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the entire economy of Ukraine before the war. Now imagine what cooperation could unlock. Some economists estimate it could reach $500 billion within a decade. Russia brings energy independence. Brazil controls food security. South Africa provides critical minerals. India offers the world's largest consumer market. China delivers manufacturing and technology supremacy. If these five powers start truly coordinating their policies, they could create their own currency systems, their own trade networks, their own technology standards. The dollar's dominance isn't guaranteed forever. Ask the British pound about that. The domino effect, this isn't just about India and China. It's about every developing nation watching this unfold and asking themselves, why are we limiting our options to please Washington? When the world's largest democracy and most populous nation starts hedging its bets with China, it sends a signal to everyone else. The era of "you're either with us or against us" is over. The multipolar world isn't coming. It's here. The ultimate irony: Trump's tariffs were supposed to contain China and strengthen American alliances. Instead, they achieved the exact opposite. Rather than isolating Beijing, they accelerated China's pivot to the global south. Rather than cementing American leadership, they pushed key allies to seek alternatives. Rather than weakening BRICS, they created perfect conditions for it to grow stronger. The harder America squeezed, the faster countries slipped through its fingers. What this means for your future. Put yourself in the shoes of a 25-year-old American right now, just starting your career. The world you're entering is fundamentally different from the one your parents knew. For their entire lives, America set global rules. American companies dominated global markets. American allies followed American leadership without question. That world is ending. Whether you're planning your investments, choosing your career path, or thinking about where to build your business, this shift changes everything. Supply chains are being rewritten in real time. Technology standards are fracturing between American and Chinese systems. Currency relationships are shifting as countries explore alternatives to dollar-dominated trade. The companies that recognize this new reality first will dominate the next decade. Tesla succeeded because they saw the EV future before Detroit did. Amazon won because they understood e-commerce before traditional retailers. The next wave of winners will be those who understand that the center of global economic gravity is shifting east. If you're in tech, finance, manufacturing, or international business, you need to understand these new power dynamics or risk being left behind by forces you never saw coming. The moment of truth. Wang Yi's visit to New Delhi isn't the end of this story, it's the beginning. What we're witnessing right now could be remembered as the exact moment when the balance of global power started tilting away from Washington and toward a new axis of cooperation between the world's two most populous nations. The question isn't whether this shift will happen. It's whether America will adapt to this new reality or get swept aside by forces it helped create. The next few months will be crucial. Every trade agreement, every diplomatic meeting, every economic partnership will either accelerate this realignment or provide Washington one last chance to change course. But here's the thing about geopolitical momentum. Once it starts rolling, it's almost impossible to stop. Your move, America. The geopolitical chessboard is being completely redrawn before our eyes, and most people have no idea what's coming next. If you want to stay ahead of these massive shifts that will impact your investments, career, and future, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell right now. We're tracking every move in this global power game, and our next deep dive will reveal which countries are secretly preparing to dump the dollar and join China's alternative financial system. Trust me, you don't want to miss what we've uncovered. Drop a comment below. Do you think India will fully align with China, or is this just strategic hedging? Your insights matter, and I read every single comment. Remember, the future belongs to those who see the changes coming before everyone else. Subscribe now, and let's decode this new world order together.